Thank you for joining us today. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Ben Walsh. I'm the government specialist here at Somerford Associates, and I'm the account manager responsible for the University of Exeter account. We're here today to talk about the Splunk Zero to Hero in 8 Weeks project that we completed in March earlier this year with the University of Exeter. I'm going to start with a brief introduction before passing you over to the real superstars of this engagement, my deployment team, which is Matt Woodhams, who's the project manager here at Somerford Associates, and Baz Donoghue, who's a technical engineer at Somerford Associates and one of the delivery engineers on the project. They're going to talk in a bit more detail about the project and the complexities of completing this in such a short time scale. I do want to say up front that there'd been no way we could have done this without completed this project had it not been for the hard work and support from Alan Hill, who's the CIDO at the University of Exeter, and his team of staff, along with the huge support that we got from Dan Hughes, who's the head of education at Splunk. So first of all, I just wanted to add a bit of context to what we did, really. So I'm just going to touch a little bit around what Splunk is, just in case there's anyone on here who's never really heard of Splunk before. Splunk comes from the word splunking, which means deep dive, and they're a US tech firm based in San Francisco. Splunk's mission statement is to make data accessible, usable, and valuable to everyone. It's essentially a Google for your machine data, which allows you to gain value and insights into data that has previously gone untouched or uncorrelated. In its essence, Splunk is a big data platform. It allows you to pull data from anywhere within your organization and put it into a central repository to visualize, correlate, and contextualize in real time. This gives invaluable insight, technical and business insight into the way the company works, granularity into critical business systems, and simpler investigations. The interesting thing about Splunk is that the same data can be used in many different ways depending upon how you look at it. Different departments can use the same data you've indexed for their own requirements. This is because Splunk is billed by amount of data ingested through Splunk per 24 hours. Typically, the problems that are first addressed by Splunk are IT security and compliance issues, IT ops, or application management. And due to this, I think people initially first thought of Splunk as a security tool. However, more and more we're seeing use cases, especially within the university space, around student analytics, operational savings, and smart connected campuses. I'm not going to go into too much more detail around explaining Splunk at this stage, as the guys will probably go into it in a bit more detail. And we also do run regular intro to Splunk workshops and webinars, which you can find more information about at our website, www.somerfordassociates.com. So I also want to talk a little bit around who we are, who Somerford are, and how we fit into the equation. So Somerford Associates are elite partners with Splunk, and we're the oldest current Splunk partners in the UK, I believe. We are technical implementation specialists, and we handle a lot of more strategic and complicated Splunk deployments. We're able to run the full sales cycle from finding the initial opportunity right through full implementation and on to continued lifetime support. We're based in Cheltenham, and that's for a very specific government reason. I'm not going to go into too much more information around that, as they can see us from here, and I'm a little bit scared about being taken out by a sniper. But the reason that we get pulled into a lot of these projects, and we are elite government specialists, is due to the fact that we've got a lot of knowledge in the government space here in the UK, and we're partnered with several other top security software that we have a similar relation to Splunk and that we work with other government agencies with. So I'm just going to go into a little bit more of the background now and the history of where the University of Exeter were kind of coming up to when we started the project. So here's some of the stats around the university. Obviously, they're a Russell Group elite research intensive university. 98% of their research is rated as international quality, and they generate over 100 million a year from their research income. And although generating this type of cutting edge research is something that the university is very proud of, it also poses a lot of problems for Alan and his team, because this type of research is very attractive to unscrupulous types, for example, nation state attacks and organized crime groups. And the problem that they've got is that the university has to kind of publicize the work that they're doing. They've got to keep it, protect it, and keep it safe. And so it's difficult. Alan's team is, they need to make sure the environment is secure whilst maintaining the highest level of student experience, but also making sure all the critical infrastructure and services remain online, and there's no disruption to the staff, students, or external customer base, and it stays business as usual all the time. So that's sort of the landscape of where they're at. But why Splunk specifically? The guys will go into a little bit more detail around this, but they had four things that they really wanted to look at, and that was they needed to manage security, operations, and app development with one tool. They needed to minimize training overheads. They needed to provide an on-premise option to control costs, and it needed to be available through contract frameworks. And Splunk was the tool that met all these different requirements. So that's about, I think that's enough from me now. I'm going to pass you across to Matt, who is the project manager who actually managed this and put it in. So he has a lot more detail around how this was done. So I'll pass you across to Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Woodhams, as Ben said. I'm one of the project managers here at Somerford, and I was involved in project managing our engagement with Exeter earlier this year. So I'm just going to talk through a little bit about the project from a project management perspective, and just give you a bit of an overview as to what we did and some of the reasons why it was a real success. So we started our scoping and discovery in late 2018, and one of the early positives from our communication and engagement with the university was the clear communication and frankness on both sides. And for me, that's a real positive of the project as a whole. The easy example for that was the University of Exeter were really clear right from the outset on their desired timescales and what they needed to achieve. And that enabled us to really, from the start, be working and building towards that, to have that shared focus and drive, even during the scoping and discovery stage at the beginning, which we're able to carry right throughout the project. And I think it's often true that planning can set you up to succeed or to fail, but I also think it sets the tones and the expectations for a collaborative team working throughout a project. So having that start off on the right foot, being really positive and working together, even just during that initial phase of scoping discovery, made a real leap forward in delivering the project successfully as a whole. And for me, even in late 2018, in December, when we were starting to wind down other projects who had perhaps change freezes over the Christmas period, I was still speaking daily with counterparts at the University of Exeter, even in the week before Christmas, making sure we had the logistics, the prerequisites, and everything in place for a successful delivery. So it was really just keeping that drive and that focus going right through, even at times where often projects slightly start to slow down. And just to kind of give you an overview of the roadmap that we had used, so phase 0 was the scoping and planning and getting the prerequisites in place. Phase 1 then was the deployment of Splunk and enterprise security, or ES, as it's abbreviated to commonly, deploying that and focusing on the key use cases. So when we talk about the 8-week period, we're talking about that phase 1 deployment, and then University of Exeter and us are now working on further ES use cases, in, if you like, phase 1.5 and into phase 2 and further phases, deploying IT, service intelligence, and other Splunk add-ons to deliver further value for the university. And really, this shared vision and understanding, including of the ambitious deadlines right from the start, enabled us to work together and to deliver such a successful project. And really, the focus on delivering the business benefits was key throughout, and having that shared understanding of where we were working and what we were working towards. Splunk has a vast number of business applications and use cases, from security, IT ops, student analytics. There's a ton of things that you can do with it. So it needs real focus and clear goals to achieve success from the beginning. And we really worked with the University of Exeter to target their critical data sources and to target around 15 key use cases for phase 1 to make sure we were delivering quick and tangible value for the university. For me, I guess an analogy would be like walking into a bar at a fancy London hotel. You have some idea of what you want. You don't walk in and just say, I want alcohol. Unless you're James Bond, you don't walk in and give a very specific cocktail recipe that you want. But you engage with the expert, with the bartender, who will come up with some ideas and work with you to craft a cocktail or drink that you want. And perhaps after you've been in a few times, you've watched them and learned from them, you might develop those skills and work on creating some cocktails at home. And I guess for me, that kind of subsequent phase is kind of where we are with phase 1.5. So for this further ES work, the University of Exeter have learned from the knowledge transfer, and they're able to add their own use cases from the data sources available in Splunk, able to add more value and more visibility into their security environment. So a couple of their key technical guys have been on some Splunk training courses. If you like, my analogy would be some cocktail making lessons. And that enables them to really be able to delve into some of the detail and to find some of the key use cases and things that they want to discover about their security environment. And then they're also working with us to scope another batch of data sources to onboard in the future to give even more visibility and even better understanding of the environments there at Exeter. And also then, as I mentioned, phase 2 is in progress to give some monitoring of key services for their confirmation and clearing phase, obviously a critical time for the university in getting future students on board. So we're just working with them to make sure they've got a glass table overview of some of the critical systems they have. And then there's further phases that we can go into over the coming months as we work with them, whether, if you like, phase 2.5 would be, again, University of Exeter starting to add some more IT service intelligence use cases and working with us to deliver more in that regard, or even phase 3 around IoT applications, student analytics, and beyond in that regard. So focusing really into that phase 1 in the 8 weeks we delivered, it's a lot to fit in, and one of the kind of things that is I guess a driver is actually trying to deliver this project alongside obviously the business as usual for the team there at Exeter. I'm conscious throughout the projects and I engage with customers that actually, whilst for me I'm trying to deliver this project, actually there's a whole wealth of things that are going on in the background that we're trying to work alongside. So really the key here is to make sure that we can deploy Splunk in the first stage of the work, to make sure we've got Splunk and enterprise security in, but actually enterprise security itself comes towards the end once we've onboarded the key data sources that we've scoped for the project. And actually they can come relatively interdependent of each other. Although I've got them here in numerical order, we could start off with data source 6 if that was the first one available. So actually the flexibility in that middle phase is quite key. So how did we manage it? I guess firstly, from our point of view here at Somerford, we used our previous experience of delivering successful Splunk deployments and drawing on a blend of Prince2 and Agile methodologies. So using some of the Agile methods and approaches around embracing change in that middle section, but also planning and controlling the variables for the initial items for that initial deployment of Splunk. Through the scoping and discovery phase, we were able to plan and control many of the variables for deploying that core Splunk architecture first. But for some of the later items where there's more unknowns and more risks, we need to be planning and managing the risks for those. So as I mentioned, we would deploy Splunk Enterprise Security last. It's a relatively known quantity. Actually, it's good practice both from a project management point of view and also from a Splunk point of view. If we deploy Enterprise Security last, then it's got the data that it can baseline some of its data models against. And also, as I mentioned, the order of onboarding data sources itself can be relatively fluid because they often rely on different teams and different aspects of your IT estate, Linux, Windows, etc. So actually embracing the change throughout the project using some kind of agile techniques we borrowed from that methodology meant that we maintained a backlog of data sources to work on to make sure there was always something that we were able to keep going. Given the timescales, there wasn't time to be postponing, delaying, coming back in a month's time. Actually, there needed to be always work that we could able to continue to work through. We controlled the variables we could and managed the risk where there were more unknowns. And if and when there were issues that were identified with the data source, either by the team at the University of Exeter or by our team here from Somerford, it was raised promptly and appropriately. We worked on it as a project team to work out the resolution method and how long it would take to resolve. And then our consultants and the technical guys from the University of Exeter were able to move on to the next data source. And from a project management perspective, we reshuffled the order of the data sources if needed to make sure there was that continuous backlog of data sources we could work through. And throughout, really, the continuous and effective communication between the team members was a real positive of this project, and one of the key reasons why we were able to deliver within that 8 weeks. To borrow the quote that Alan used at Splunk Live London earlier in the year, no plan survives contact with the enemy. We needed to embrace change, particularly in that middle section of onboarding data sources, where we are uncovering unknowns and working at pace. But actually, by focusing on delivering the business benefits and make sure we realise value for the University of Exeter, we're able to successfully deliver this first phase and set a real good foundation for further work with the university to deliver even more value and use cases as we go forward into the future. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour, really, from a project management perspective. As Ben said, if you do have any questions, do either let us know through post them here, or we're happy to speak with you afterwards as necessary. But I'll hand over now to Baz, who's one of our Splunk security architects, who will go through a little bit more detail around the technical aspects of the engagement.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us this morning. Hope you're all well. My name's Baz Donoghue, and as Matt said, I'm a Splunk security architect. So that title, I suppose, is encompassed by sort of my role at Somerford. So at Somerford, I'm technically a solutions consultant. So Splunk is one of the many different technology platforms and solutions that I've worked with. And to give my background, I suppose, so I've been with Somerford for about a year now, and worked on a huge variety of different implementations across various different sectors. My background is defence, so I spent 12 years in the RAF. First 6 I spent flying to sandy or jungly or cold various places and setting up their various different con systems. And the last 6 years I spent at the Joint Cyber Unit at MOD Caution, where I spent a vast majority of my time in innovation and exploitation. So, and part of that role was actually developing the log analysis platform, which at that time and still now is Splunk for the whole of MOD's cyber defense program to give them the additional view that they required. So quite a bit of experience when it comes to these types of security deployments. So I'm going to talk around some of the technical aspects of how we developed this capability at Exeter from zero to SIEM in such a short period of time. So from a technical perspective and from a plan perspective, there were several challenges that Exeter faced. So one of which was obviously they needed a security environment. There was a security environment with no centralised SIEM solution, which kind of lends itself onto there being various different tools that various different security operations teams members had to utilise. So, coined the phrase swivel chair, and this is essentially whereby people are having to spin their chair from one screen to another to another to another to access all the various different security tools that are deployed within their environment. We see this quite often, and it can sometimes be a challenge for the team, not just to fully understand all of the tools and platforms at their disposal, but to have a centralized and aligned view of their security operations from a tools perspective in one easy and accessible place. There were no formally developed security cases. And again, this might sound something, if you're already sort of beginning your way on the security journey or wherever you currently are, this might seem familiar to you, and it's familiar to lots of organizations. So the first step on any sort of security maturity model is an ad hoc approach. That's pretty much where everybody starts. That's these lone heroes or teams of heroes who are holding up the world themselves, where they're just fighting the fight day in, day out, and they're dealing with issues as they see them. Naturally, what we want to do then is try and develop some formal security use cases to help bring a little bit of structure to that. And again, this Splunk SIEM solution lends itself well to that. Also, they understood where they were and where they wanted to be, as well as the timelines involved with that. So they understood that, we want to deploy, a leading SIEM solution, but at pace. So the flash to bang of 0 to value had to be relatively quick. So that had to be obviously managed by our team here, and we had to use appropriate technology to be able to do that as well. As well as being able to understand and leverage data, absolutely a key part of any security solution or security operations team. You need to understand the data that's available to you and how best to leverage that in a security operation environment. And as I said, gain a single pane of glass visibility. So this talks back to the swivel chair sort of idea, whereby instead of having to rotate our chairs, what we want our security operations guys to do is to just see all of the information that they need to see under a single pane of glass, under a single screen, and then be able to delve in as they need to into the specific security tools as and when the security incident dictates. So how are we going to manage this? So essentially, you needed to select an agile and adaptable SIEM solution. So that's key because of the timelines involved and because of the methodology that I'm going to talk about from a technical perspective. The SIEM needs to be agile and it needs to be adaptable. And by agile, what I'm talking about is the fact that Splunk, unlike a lot of SIEM solutions, is schema on read as opposed to schema on write. So what that means is that a schema on write SIEM solution ingests data and at that moment decides what fields are going to be available, how that data is going to be broken down, and what particular key points of data are going to be available to filter on. And it's written there and then at that time. The difficulty of schema, the positives of schema on write is that you can have a very fixed and rigid schema to write events into, so you can plan quite well. But in the instance, but the difficulty being is that if you need to make any changes, and obviously with an implementation within the pace that we faced here, there were multiple changes to adapt to the situation. It can often be very difficult to do, and you have to re-ingest the data. So Splunk actually is schema on read. So what that means is that the data goes in with a minimum level of metadata applied at the sort of indexing layer, and then all of the field extraction and normalization of those events is carried out when the user clicks search or when a search is run or when a dashboard is displayed. So that means if it isn't presented to you as you require it, if the fields aren't quite named correctly or we haven't pulled enough fields from the data, we can make a change there and then, simply click search again, and all of the new fields that we've just extracted and planned will come out there and then. So as you can understand, very, very powerful and very, very agile for us to be able to make changes on the fly. We wanted the idea was to use a tried and trusted delivery partner as well. So that being Somerford Associates, as mentioned, we've got lots of experience in deploying these types of SIEM solutions. We've got lots of IT operations experts as well as security experts who've got plenty of experience in the realm and can bring that experience to bear as part of the project. And also we needed to understand to use security. We're going to use security use case implementation strategy, which is I will explain as we move along. We use tools such as Splunk Security Essentials, again, which is a free tool. I will be demonstrating later as to try and understand what security use cases might be pertinent to any organization, as well as data source analysis. So typically, we tend to use use case implementation first, and then the data source analysis can fall in behind. So read into the phase parts. 1.5 is essentially where the data source analysis might be used in phase 1.5, and then phases 1 and 2 is essentially where we're trying to understand the use cases. But what we needed to do is, because we wanted to accelerate the capability, we took on a strategy where these two actually levered into each other quite nicely to be able to increase the capability of the SIEM platform fairly rapidly. But that can only really be done with a good team on both sides and some realistic understanding and planning of what the goals are. So from the how, we'll talk about the SIEM. So the SIEM chosen was essentially the SIEM solution was Splunk Enterprise Security. Now, Enterprise Security is actually a premium application that sits on top of Splunk Enterprise. Now, Splunk Enterprise is the core log and analysis platform that's available from Splunk. And again, it isn't specifically focused at any one vertical within any sort of organization. So it doesn't look only at security or only at IT ops or maybe application development. Essentially, if it's human readable data and it has a timestamp, then Splunk can ingest it. And as long as you have an idea of what you'd like to do with that data, you can basically do it. However, with the huge amount of data sources available to people, they understand that doing this every single time from scratch can often be time consuming. So what they've done is built up a repertoire and a library of different apps that can be deployed nice and easily, so that we can get value very, very quickly from the platform. So 2 in particular we use from the security perspective of this implementation, and that's Splunk Security Essentials. Now, as an application, Splunk Security Essentials doesn't actually do anything, but instead is designed to help guide people along the maturity of their security journey. And I will be demonstrating that, and hopefully you'll be able to see the value from it and understand how easily you can leverage the information available in this application to start your journey and then to progress and mature it. And secondly, we're looking at Splunk Enterprise Security. So Enterprise Security, or ES sometimes it's called for short, is a SIEM-like capability, which is an application deployed on top of Splunk Enterprise, which increases the security capability of Splunk Enterprise by adding in additional key frameworks. So it includes things like an event management framework, threat intelligence, and as well as risk. So it adds all these additional, slightly more complex frameworks to the mix that it just increases the overall security capability of the Splunk platform and the team utilizing it. So the strategy. So as mentioned, we're going to use a use case strategy. So the idea here is to identify use cases based on an available data source. So we can understand what data sources are available to us, and then once we've understood what data sources, then we can aim to match those with our security use cases that the organization requires, to then try and understand the baseline of what's available. So it might be that, for example, we've highlighted that there's maybe 10 use cases which are extremely important to the organization. However, what we would then aim to do is align that with the data sources that are available to the organization, and then add that as part of the plan. So Matt mentioned that the onboarding of data is very flexible, and it's with this key in mind. So it might be that although the number one priority use case, if we're going to set a priority for them, might not have data available at that moment, it may be that the second or third there is data available, so we can onboard that, start gaining value from that, implement the use case so that we can start carrying out our security operations immediately with those use cases. And then as the data becomes available, then we can start employing stuff against our use cases. The other element then is to identify gaps in the security posture based on these key use cases. So typically we would work with one before the other and mature, but whereby timelines dictate that actually we need to have a fully operational, a fully valuable SIEM capability at pace, then we'll also adopt this methodology. And the methodology here is that we also then we use the use cases that we require to identify gaps in any of the posture, so that will inform us of any gaps that we might have in the organization. And then we can use that based on use cases to say, okay, well, this was highlighted as a use case, and actually we're really interested in this, but it's become apparent that the data is not available. So now we can have some concurrent activity to try and gain that information so that we can start filling gaps and plugging gaps in our security posture, if not to be able to give us an overview, but then at least to be able to understand where those gaps are. And we take that strategy, and then that will help lead us to a couple of questions that we need to answer from a security perspective. And they are rationalize, rectify, and reassess. So essentially what we're saying here is, okay, we've highlighted a use case. We've realized that this is important to the organization, but potentially maybe the data is not available to us at the moment, or steps are needed to get that data. So what we need to do is rationalize, rectify, and reassess. So rationalize being, okay, so how important is it that we need this use case? Is the requirement for the use case, does that overweigh maybe any potential complications of ingestion or any issues when it comes to maybe there might be a cost associated with getting that data? If it is, absolutely, then we can rectify it. If not, we can maybe reassess and rationalize again and continue that loop all the way through. And this is something that's going to be consistently occurring every single day from any SOC team who's carrying out security operations. It isn't a one-stop shop. Once we're done, we finish. This is a process that's going to need to be carried on. And that kind of leads me into what we're saying here is a security journey. So although Exeter have done a fantastic job within the periods of time, again in association with Somerford, to deploy this SIEM capability, and they now have a benchmark capability wherein they can start developing and understanding their own use cases, ingesting and normalizing the data to realize those. Actually, the journey from a security perspective is one that never ends. So this is something, as in we will work in partnership to include additional phases, and as we progress, we will consistently either be identifying new use cases which will require new data sources, or even tuning the use cases that already exist to maybe potentially remove some false positives, or maybe even just to focus in. So the journey is cyclical and consistent, and that's kind of the methodology that you need to take forward, always sort of moving forward. So without further ado, I'll talk about Splunk. So we've kind of mentioned Splunk previously. Ben sort of explained the general premise, and it is exactly that. So essentially, it allows you to just ask questions of your data. So you identify some data sources, you ingest them into Splunk, and again, as long as they're human readable and they're accessible, then we can then start asking questions of them, whether or not that's we want to discover some metrics or statistics, or maybe we want to highlight very specific events and visualize them and display them in a manner that the various different users require, or generate reports or dashboards and views, again for various different requirements. Then this is essentially what Splunk can do. So it has a number of apps I mentioned that are layered across the top to help gain value of those very, very quickly. So Splunk Enterprise, which is similar to Splunk Cloud, is the core enterprise, so the core implementation. So Splunk Enterprise being typically either on-premise or a non-hosted cloud. So for example, it might be hosted in AWS or maybe a Google Cloud Platform, but still installed and managed in a similar manner to on-premise. There's also Splunk Cloud, which takes away that the underlying issue from an infrastructure perspective and just presents you with a web in and then a web login and the ability to then manage that instance remotely without having to worry about infrastructure. Then we also have enterprise security, which I'm going to go into. We have ITSI, which is a service intelligence-led element of similar to enterprise security that adds additional frameworks and provides capabilities for dealing with different health and performance indicators across different IT structures and services. And then we have some UBA. So UBA is a non-signature based application from a security perspective, carries out sort of heuristics of understanding what entities are carrying out within your organization, and highlights to you any anomalies or deviations from that path. So the security platform, as we're talking specifically about security, encompasses these key areas of Splunk. So we've mentioned Splunk Enterprise, that's the core capability. Security Essentials and Enterprise Security I've also talked about and I'm going to demonstrate. Enterprise Security Content Updates are updates which are regularly released for anybody who has an Enterprise Security license, and this looks at all of the current trends and risks involved across various different industries and allows you to then leverage those use cases. So it's to keep you up to date with security. So it's not just we install enterprise security, we develop our use cases and the onus then is on you. Actually, content updates will provide you with a use case library for you to say, okay, well, actually, we've recognized in the last 2 or 3 weeks that these types of attacks are occurring, and we've developed some use cases to help you combat and detect that. So you might be interested in these. So that's what enterprise security content updates provide you. Mentioned UBA, and as well, the underlying heart of any Splunk instance really is the data, and particularly in the premium applications such as enterprise security and ITSI, Splunk utilizes a layer of abstraction across the top of the data, which are called data models, and often auditing and understanding how these data models are configured and what data they include can be a little bit difficult. It's all available within Splunk, but it's kind of a dark art essentially. So we've created at Somerford a way of being able to help make that a little bit more accessible. So we created the data model audit and compliance app with a view to provide not just an audit of the data models and the data available in them, but also with some compliance elements as well. So currently looks at GPG 13 compliance and helps you understand whether or not your implementation and the data within your implementation can achieve that level of compliance. So without further ado, I will provide you with a demonstration. So hopefully you should be able to see my screen here. So this is the default application from Splunk. So this is Splunk searching and reporting application. So any Splunk core implementation will have this app. And it's the gateway into being able to understand data that's in your instance. Now it works similarly as mentioned previously by Ben as a kind of Google for your logs. So I'll kind of demonstrate that now. So we have information in here. So and the information that I'm going to show you at the moment is some NetScreen firewall events. So some typical security events. And we can select the period of time that we'd like to search over. And as soon as we click search, then Splunk will spring into life and show us all of the events that are associated with this data source. So we can see that over the last 24 hours, there are just under 2,000 events associated with the NetScreen firewalls between these periods of time. It gives us a nice timeline. So we can see here a nice number of events. And again, we would kind of expect this to be constant. But again, as you start to understand your data, you'll be able to understand actually your environment. And for example, we have a little dip here on Monday. It might be that within this particular organization, actually, this might be that maybe there's some maintenance carried out, or maybe there's some other elements that are occurring that will inform as to why this drop happens. But again, it gives you the visibility of that so that you can then go and explore why that's occurring within your organization. So again, we've got some firewall logs. So, and it's broken it down by event, which is quite nice, but again, can somewhat be difficult to look at, certainly to get any sort of initial value from unless you know exactly what you're looking at. Now, what Splunk does is it takes this raw event, which we can see at the top here, and it breaks it out into various different fields automatically for us. So based on the technology, so for example, this was a NetScreen firewall. The NetScreen firewall app is available from the repository I mentioned called Splunkbase. We simply ingest the NetScreen firewall data, get the app, apply it to Splunk, and it pulls all this value out of the events for us. So you can see things there. Well, now we're getting things like bytes in, bytes out. We're getting destinations, sources, actions, all kinds of things. And this will help us then be able to drill down and carry out statistical searches on these types of things. What we can do, as I mentioned, it is like a Google. So let's try permit, another language that's used in firewalls. Here we go. So this is now pulled back 994 events. So it's kind of cut our events down in half. And we can see here it's highlighted every area where there is a permit. So that's fantastic. That's useful. Okay, well, maybe we're particularly interested in, for example, maybe the number of sources from our firewall's perspective. So again, this is calling us permit. So now we can do something along the lines of statistical count by the number of sources. And what this will do is then give us a breakdown of all of the source IP addresses. So here are all of our sources and the number of times that they have been involved in a permit event within the last 24 hours. So again, we can filter that down. So this is the noisiest talker, our 10.00.12. And again, we can start leveraging off of this to start understanding and applying further filtering rules. So maybe in this instance, we're only particularly interested in our noisiest talkers. So we only want to see where the count is actually greater than 20, for example. So now this is going to filter out and only show us some of the talkiest events. So now we can see actually these are the only ones that are above. However, as powerful as the SPL is, it's not particularly intuitive to everybody. You do have to understand the MITRE of it, and again, the data visualizations cannot always be apparent. So actually, Splunk has some things with built-in views and dashboards to actually start gaining a lot more value from these events off the bat. However, before I go into showing you those from an enterprise security perspective, I would like to show you some security essentials. So this is the Splunk Security Essentials app. And I previously mentioned that this app doesn't actually do anything. There's no alerts. there's no alerts, there's no particularly views or dashboards that are going to give you the particular value on your data. Instead, what it does is it aims to guide you through a security journey. It aims for you to be able to understand where you are now, what security use cases are available, or what can be achieved. That can help you understand what is important to you and then help you recognize which data sources you need. So again, even if you're one of the most advanced SOCs, it's always valuable to come in here and look at some of the examples as to how Splunk recommends you can do it from various different categories. Or a complete newbie who's just taken their first step on this security journey and they're not entirely sure. It can be somewhat overwhelming to understand, well, I want to protect everything, but I can't. So what are some key things I can protect? How do I progress myself in that security? And this can help you do it. So they mentioned a breakdown of 6 different categories of example, everything from security monitoring through to insider threat and compliance. And what we can do is select one of these categories. So I'm going to click security monitoring. And what this will now do is give me some examples in the demonstrated by and displayed by tiles as to the various different use cases associated with this. Now, I mentioned security is a journey, and it started us off at stage 1. If I was to expand this out, we can all go all the way up to stage 6, which is the more advanced use cases, but we're going to begin at 1 and see what we get. So this is now highlighting to us some of the available use cases that have been recommended from a Security Essentials perspective. These include things such as basic brute force detection, a basic malware outbreak. Maybe we're interested in large web uploads. So again, from a further learning perspective, certainly University of Exeter is interested in people exfiltrating data or maybe having access to some IP. Again, we can be able to. This is giving us an indicator of what we would need to be able to realize that use case. And again, some basic brute force detection. Typically, one of the first vectors is to gain access, so we can drill into that. Each one of these gives us a little narrative so we can understand what they are, as well as some of these highlight boxes with yellow saying that it's featured. So it's saying that it is a feature that you can utilize from. It's a highlighted use case from within Security Essentials, as in it's very easy to achieve and is essentially recommended as one of the first that you enact. Tells you whether or not the searches are included. So all green means the searches are included and available with Essentials, so we can lift those and drop them into our instance of Splunk. Where we see grey, it's saying, okay, well, you might this is doable, but you might need to take the next step, the next logical evolutionary step, which is enterprise security. So let's click on basic brute force and just have a quick look at one of these use cases looks like. So straight away, it gives us a description. So it mentions here that it uses a simple threshold of Windows security logs, and if there's a large number of failed-ins and at least one successful login, then that's considered a brute force detection. It gives you some more information, so it breaks down the use case, so we know we're in security monitoring. Any categories, again, with a security impact narrative, again, so you can fully understand what the impact of this particular security incident is against your organization. It tries to give you an indication of how often it will alert, so this has been categorized as relatively low, and a difficulty of employing it. So when we're talking about SPL, that's the search processing language that I mentioned previously, and this is saying that actually it's very, very basic, so it's not overly complicated and can be easily employed. Again, there's some drop downs here. There's an indication of how you implement this, an understanding of what the possible false positives are. It even tells you how to respond to it should this alert within your organization. So you can actually build up an incident response playbook hand in hand with the security use cases so that you can progress an event from initial detection all the way through to either resolution or mitigation. And then down here, it gives us an idea of what the data might look like in various different guises in Splunk. So this is a panel showing us the top users failing authentication. And again, we can filter on these. We've got some top sources failing authentication, some failed authentications over time, users with persistent failed authentication again. So this is all various different elements from the same data. It's just helping us apply that logic to see what the art of the possible is. And then down here, it's kind of giving us some of the outliers from the actual security use case. So for example, it's highlighting the fact there is one outlier from this logic. Using a total of 7,000 raw events, what we've noticed is that there is one particular source who has failed authentication over 1,000 times, so 1066, but there has been 3 successful attempts at this time. So that is indicative of a successful brute force attack. Multiple failures as they're trying to bang on your door, and eventually they hit in the right spot and the door pops open and they are now successful. So this is highlighted that is potentially a security incident that's occurred. Now, at the minute, it's using demo data, so it ships with the demonstration data to be able to highlight this to you. But what we actually want to do is maybe we want to use live data. So if we click this pip up here, what this allows us to do then is use our own data from within our own instance, and this will show us if any of these events are occurring within our own instance. Now, again, that's very, very useful, but what we might be more interested in is the fact that, okay, well, yeah, we recognize the value of this use case, but how do we do it? Have I got the right data for it? So included, there is a data source check here. If we click this, what this will go away and do is it will run a scan across all of the data that's available within your instance of Splunk at the moment, and it will tell you whether or not you have the data available to realize and enact any of the security use case examples that are available as part of this. So you can see here, I'm lacking quite a bit of live data from an AWS perspective. And naturally, we'd expect there to be lots of demo data as it ships with it. I'd be worried if there wasn't. But as it carries out that analysis, what we can do, for example, is expand out one of these. So here we go, basic brute force detection. So it tells me that I have the demo data, obviously, but I also have the data available in my instance, and I also have the data available as a normalized data model, which is something that we kind of explain in some of our other workshops. So we expand that use case out, and this tells us exactly what we need to do. So live data, you need to have Windows security, Linux secure, or SIEM data. Fantastic, have that. And we must have the source field defined, which we do. If we didn't, then it does give us an indication of what we need to do to rectify that so that we can then successfully utilize this use case. So hopefully you can see and agree with me that this is an incredibly powerful tool for anybody who's carrying out their security journey. And this is always the first step on that road that we recommend from a Splunk perspective. You highlight the use cases you're interested in, and then you can use these example views and dashboard panels to then start building your own views and dashboards around the security use cases that you're interested in. Now, whilst this is very useful from a security perspective, it isn't considered a SIEM solution because it doesn't, a core Splunk doesn't include things such as an event management framework or threat intelligence framework off the bat, or even maybe some risk scoring frameworks. Now, enterprise security is the next stage in this, and it does automatically provide all of these views. So what it helps us do is take this data and these searches, combine them with the use cases that we're interested in to provide us with these types of views. So from a security posture perspective, which is usually the first place to start from enterprise security, and this is enterprise security, it gives us this. So now we have a single pane of glass security visibility over all of the security events available within our environment. So we're looking at these different tiles at the top. Reload that for the load results. So it's giving us all of our notable events. So the notable event framework within enterprise security is essentially our incident management and event management system. And this is giving us a breakdown so we can see straight away the posture of our instance. So we have several critical events, several low but more medium, getting up into 350. We can see notable events over time. So at this period of time here, at the 17:30 on the 22nd of July, there was a big spike in access notable events. So that is notable events associated with accessibility and authentication. So this could be indicative of a potential potential number of attacks against our environment or a potential campaign against us. And again, we can then have a drill down into the individual notable events. So we've got a host with multiple infections. Again, we've had a bit of a spike line here, so that's increased. So again, something might be involved there. And again, across all of these, actually, there seem to be spikes in the same place. So they might very well help us link all of these events together. So we've had a host with multiple infections, excessive number of failed logons. There's been some brute force access, which again, we've highlighted the requirement from within Security Essentials. And there's some threat activity. So these all might be involved. And again, each of these can be clicked into and drilled down into so that we can understand each of these. So if we look at brute force access behavior, this is going to take us into our incident review panel. And our incident review panel here now is going to highlight to us all of the individual notable events, so all of the events that have been raised against that. So this gives us the time the event occurred, the domain, so we mentioned access, gives us a title, so there's been a brute force access detected from this particular server, as well as an urgency and a status. So we can do things with this, such as we can assign this to a particular person, we can change the status, there are various actions that we can carry out, and once we've assigned these, then that individual then can take this event and run through it using Splunk as various different mechanisms to understand. Expand one of these out, it gives us the details around about how that event has occurred. So it tells us the application, it gives us the source and a risk score associated with that as well, which is something that we can configure. It gives us a little description. It's saying that it's failed to authenticate 30 times and successfully authenticated 40 times. So it kind of fits that initial out of the box use case requirement of a number of failed authentications and some successful. And again, this is interesting because it's something that we might want to go and have a look at from that perspective. It also offers us the capability to carry out investigations and glass tables. I won't demonstrate those today, but we do have a workshop whereby we do. But it also lets us delve into our security domains to get a better understanding of what's occurring there. So that's split up into access, endpoint, network, and identity. So if you flick into endpoint, for example, if I just show you the malware center, what we can do here is this is going to pull together all of the different events associated with malware and give us a top level glass pane view of everything that's occurring. So we can see the number of new infections, and these tiles look at the current 24 hours versus the last. So actually we're down to 24 from 40, so the SOC's doing something right. Infections has gone up by 1, so it's gone down by 40, so it's gone up by 1. So again, that's not too bad. And overall, it's telling us that the total number of infections is decreasing minimally. So at least it's decreasing. Maybe we could get that quicker. And again, there's some additional views and panels that are associated with these. So enterprise security essentially takes all of the use cases that you've recognized, maybe utilizing security essentials, all of the use cases that are pertinent to your organization. It takes the data that we've ingested and recognized that is both available and will be available, as well as giving us indications of what would be valuable to have to help give us that rationalization piece, and pulls it all together in an easy to navigate, customize, and utilize SIEM view, which gives us a single pane of glass for all of our tools. So this, for example, the malware center now, that doesn't just encompass one tool, that's all of our malware tools. So we would put all of the data into one place, we can see exactly what's going on. So again, I'm conscious of time. I could talk all day, and often do talk all day about these types of things, but hopefully that's a nice, again, whistle-stop tour understanding of the journey from data to understanding use cases to SIEM. But I will close out by saying, yes, you know, if you've liked what you've seen and you've got a bit of a thirst for understanding how enterprise security could be a value of you, or maybe you'd like to understand how security use cases could be developed using security essentials and carried forward using that, then we have a various of workshops and webinars available to you. And again, like University of Exeter, if you feel like you need to deploy, it's a requirement for you to deploy a SIEM at pace, you know, using very agile methodology with as much support as you can, then you too can do that with enterprise security and Somerford.